The rain hammered against my apartment window like bullets from heaven, each drop carrying the weight of another shattered dream. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the note Sarah had left on the counter next to my cold coffee and yesterday's unpaid bills. I don't see you as a boyfriend anymore, just a roommate who pays bills. Perfect. At least now I knew what a subscription service felt like. My name is David Chen. Wait, scratch that. My name is David Thompson, and I'm a 34-year-old IT security auditor who just discovered that 5 years of my life had been reduced to a monthly payment plan. Sarah Williams, had summarized our entire relationship with the emotional depth of a parking ticket. I read the note again, my fingers tracing the neat handwriting that had once scribbled, "I love you," on birthday cards. Now it was all business, clean and surgical like a corporate termination letter. Perfect, I said aloud to my empty kitchen, my voice echoing off the granite countertops we'd picked out together at Home Depot 3 years ago. Absolutely perfect. The apartment felt different now, like someone had adjusted the lighting to reveal all the cracks in the walls I'd never noticed before. Our shared space suddenly looked like what it apparently always was, a business arrangement with decorative pillows. Sarah emerged from our bedroom, her bedroom, dragging a suitcase behind her. She'd already changed into her power suit, the navy blue one she wore to important meetings. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe bun that meant she was in full corporate mode. "David, we need to talk about the practical arrangements," she said, not looking at me directly. Her voice carried that professional tone she used with difficult clients. "Practical arrangements," I repeated, setting down her note. "Sure, let's be practical." She positioned herself across the kitchen island from me, maintaining what I recognized as her preferred negotiation distance. "I think we can handle this like adults. We'll need to figure out the lease, the utilities, who keeps what furniture." "The lease is in my name," I said calmly. "Has been since we moved in." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her features. "Well, yes, but we've been splitting everything 50-50 for 3 years. I have equity in this place." "Equity?" I almost laughed. "Sarah, you don't have equity in a rental apartment. You have a history of paying half the rent." "Don't be difficult about this, David. We're both adults." "You're absolutely right. We are adults, and adults honor their commitments." I walked to my laptop bag and pulled out a manila folder I'd prepared the night before after finding her note. "Since you want to be practical, let's be practical." I spread several documents across the kitchen island. Bank statements, utility bills, grocery receipts, all organized with the methodical precision that made me good at my job. "What is this?" she asked, her professional composure slipping slightly. "A practical arrangement. You said you don't see me as a boyfriend anymore, just a roommate who pays bills. Perfect. I can work with that." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she scanned the papers. "David, what are you doing?" "Exactly what you suggested. If we're roommates, then we split everything 50-50, real 50-50, not the version where I pay for groceries, dinners out, your car insurance, and that gym membership you never use." I pointed to the highlighted numbers on the bank statements. "Over the past year, I've covered about 70% of our shared expenses. If we're going to be roommates, that changes today." "This is ridiculous. You're being petty." "I'm being practical. Your word, not mine." I slid a handwritten agreement across the counter. "Room rental agreement. Market rate for half this apartment is $1,200 a month, utilities not included. First month due today." Sarah stared at the paper like it might bite her. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. You want practical? Here's practical. Separate groceries, separate streaming accounts, separate everything. I'll even put tape down the middle of the refrigerator if that helps." "David, this is insane. We've been together for 5 years." "We're together, past tense. You made that clear in your note." I gestured toward the crumpled paper. "You want to be roommates? Fine. But I'm not subsidizing your lifestyle anymore." She picked up the rental agreement, her hands trembling slightly. "What if I don't sign this?" "Then you can find somewhere else to live. The lease is in my name, remember? I'm being generous by offering you market rate. For several long moments, the only sound was the rain against the windows and the hum of the refrigerator that would soon be divided by tape. Sarah's professional mask was cracking, revealing something underneath that looked almost like panic. "I need time to think about this," she finally said. "Take all the time you need. Rent's due by the end of the week." I gathered up my papers and headed toward the door. "I'm going to work. There's a separate grocery list on the counter for things you'll need to buy for yourself. Coffee, creamer, those expensive yogurts you like, all yours to handle now." "Where are you going?" The question came out sharper than she probably intended. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. "To work. You know, that thing I do to pay bills? Don't wait up. I might grab dinner out tonight. Separate dinner, of course." The door closed behind me with a satisfying click, leaving Sarah alone with her practical arrangement and the sound of rain that suddenly seemed a lot less like bullets and more like applause. My phone buzzed as I walked to my car, a text from my buddy Mike at the gym. "Drinks tonight? Jennifer's working late again." I typed back, "Absolutely. I'm newly single and celebrating my freedom." The response came immediately. "About damn time, brother." As I drove through the rain toward my office, I caught myself smiling for the first time in months. Sarah wanted practical? She was about to discover just how practical I could be. 3 days into our new roommate arrangement, I was beginning to understand why Sarah had looked so panicked. She'd signed the rental agreement, reluctantly and with several dramatic sighs, but the reality of splitting everything 50-50 was hitting her harder than I'd expected. I found her standing in front of the refrigerator Tuesday morning, staring at the blue painter's tape I'd used to divide it down the middle. Her side looked remarkably empty compared to mine. "This is ridiculous, David," she said without turning around. "We're acting like children." "We're acting like roommates," I corrected, pouring coffee from my personal coffee maker. I'd moved the good one to my side of the kitchen. "How's that generic coffee working out for you?" She shot me a look that could have frozen hell over. "Fine." "Great. Don't forget you've got utilities to settle up today. Your half comes to $237. Sarah's phone rang before she could respond. She glanced at the screen and her entire demeanor changed, shoulders straightening, voice dropping to that professional tone she used for important calls. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she answered, walking quickly toward her bedroom. "Yes, I can absolutely handle that project timeline." The bedroom door closed with a sharp click. Mr. Harrison. I'd heard that name a lot lately during her late-night work calls. Richard Harrison, her direct supervisor and the VP of Strategic Development at Morrison Tech Solutions, where Sarah worked as a project manager. As an IT security auditor, I'd developed certain instincts about suspicious patterns. Sarah's behavior over the past few months had been pinging those instincts like a network intrusion alarm. The late-night calls, the new wardrobe, the sudden interest in working weekends, the mysterious gifts she claimed were bonuses from work. I finished my coffee and headed to my home office. Time to do what I did best: follow the digital breadcrumbs. Setting up passive network monitoring on our home Wi-Fi was simple enough. I wasn't hacking anything, just monitoring traffic patterns on my own network. Perfectly legal, and given that Sarah was now officially just a tenant, well within my rights as the leaseholder. The results were illuminating. Over the next week, I documented everything with the methodical precision that made me good at my job. Sarah's devices showed encrypted messaging apps I'd never seen her use, video calls during hours she claimed to be in regular meetings, and data usage patterns that suggested she was uploading and downloading large files, photos and videos based on the metadata signatures. But the real breakthrough came when I started analyzing her spending patterns. Sarah had always been careful about money, almost obsessively so. But lately, there had been changes. The expensive coffee she couldn't afford as a roommate, the new clothes, the professional manicures every week. I pulled up our shared credit card statements from before the breakup. There, a pattern of charges to high-end restaurants during her supposed working lunches, charges to lingerie stores, a weekend at the Riverside Resort that she'd told me was a mandatory team-building retreat. The Riverside Resort charged corporate rates differently than personal rates. I knew because I'd audited their parent company 2 years ago. The charge on Sarah's card was personal rate, not corporate. My phone buzzed. Mike from the gym. "How's the roommate situation working out?" "Better than expected," I typed back, learning all sorts of interesting things about my new tenant. "Want to grab a beer and tell me about it?" Rain check. I've got some research to finish. I spent the rest of the evening cross-referencing Sarah's spending with her work schedule. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Every late meeting corresponded with charges to restaurants or hotels. Every weekend conference matched up with personal expenses that should have been covered by her company. But the most interesting discovery came when I traced the merchant codes on some of her recent purchases. The expensive jewelry she'd claimed was a reward to herself for a big project, paid for through a corporate account registered to Morrison Tech Solutions, Richard Harrison's corporate account, to be specific. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the evidence spread across my monitors. Sarah wasn't just cheating, she was doing it on the company dime. Her boss was funding their affair through what looked like embezzled training budgets and miscategorized business expenses. My phone rang. Sarah calling from the living room. "David, can you come out here? We need to talk." I found her sitting on the couch. My couch, technically, since she'd contributed nothing to the furniture when we moved in together. She'd changed out of her work clothes into the silk pajamas that used to drive me crazy. Now, they just looked like a costume. "This isn't working," she said without preamble. "This roommate thing, it's making both of us miserable." "I'm not miserable," I said honestly. "I'm actually learning quite a bit." "David, please, can't we just try to work this out?" Maybe I was hasty with that note. Maybe we can find a middle ground. I studied her face. The desperation was real, but it wasn't about missing me. It was about the money, about losing her subsidized lifestyle right when she needed it most to maintain appearances with her married boss. "What kind of middle ground?" I asked. "Maybe we don't need to split everything so precisely. Maybe we can go back to how things were, just with better communication." "Better communication. Like you communicating where you really were last weekend when you told me you were at that conference in Portland?" The color drained from her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean the Riverside Resort isn't in Portland, Sarah. It's 20 minutes from here, and corporate rates don't get charged to personal credit cards." She stood up abruptly, her silk pajamas rustling. "Have you been spying on me?" "I've been monitoring my own network and reviewing our shared financial accounts. You know, the practical stuff roommates need to handle." "David, you're scaring me." "Good, because you should be scared. You want to know what scares me? Finding out that my former girlfriend, has been committing what looks like embezzlement to fund her affair with her married boss." Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "That's not... You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. Richard Harrison has been using company funds to pay for your little romantic getaways. That's fraud, Sarah. Federal fraud if it crosses state lines, which I'm betting it does." She sank back onto the couch, her hands shaking. "David, please. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. It's what I do for a living, remember? I audit companies for financial irregularities. I find patterns that don't make sense. And your spending patterns over the past 6 months make perfect sense once you factor in corporate embezzlement." "What do you want?" The question came out as barely a whisper. I smiled, feeling something dark and satisfying settle in my chest. "I want you to be the roommate you said you wanted to be. Pay your rent, buy your own groceries, and keep your criminal activities away from my apartment. And if I don't? Then you can explain to the FBI why your boss has been buying you jewelry with company funds." Sarah stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. Maybe I was finally showing her who I really was underneath 5 years of being her personal ATM. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Take all the time you need, but rent's still due Friday." I headed back to my office, leaving her alone on the couch with her silk pajamas and her mounting panic. Behind me, I heard her phone buzzing with what I was sure was another work call from Mr. Harrison. This was going to be even more interesting than I'd thought. By Friday morning, Sarah had paid her rent. She'd also started acting like a caged animal, pacing around the apartment and jumping every time her phone rang. The transformation from confident corporate climber to nervous wreck was almost artistic in its completeness. I was enjoying my coffee, the good coffee from my side of the kitchen, when she emerged from her bedroom dressed in a sharp black suit I'd never seen before. The price tag was probably more than her monthly rent. "New outfit?" I asked casually. "It's for an important presentation today," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "Must be really important. That looks like designer work. Armani? Hugo Boss?" Her hand smoothed the jacket nervously. "It was on sale. Everything's on sale somewhere." I pulled out my phone and opened a price tracking app. "Let's see. That exact suit retails for about $1,500. Even on sale, you're looking at $800 to $900 minimum." Sarah's face went pale. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what? I'm just impressed by my roommate's shopping skills. On a project manager's salary, that's some serious budgeting." I took another sip of coffee. Or really generous bonuses from work. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "I'm going to be late. Have a good day at the office. Say hi to Mr. Harrison for me." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I waited exactly 10 minutes before heading to my own car. One of the advantages of being a freelance IT auditor was flexible scheduling. Today, I was scheduling some field research. Morrison Tech Solutions occupied 3 floors of a glass and steel monument to corporate success in the downtown business district. I'd never visited Sarah's workplace before. She'd always claimed it was too boring to bother with, but I was beginning to understand why she'd kept me away. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with the kind of expensive minimalism that screamed, "We have money to burn." I approached the reception desk with my most professional smile. "Good morning. I'm here to see someone about your vendor payment systems. I'm conducting an audit for one of your suppliers." The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly applied makeup and a name tag reading Jessica, looked up from her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" I was hoping to speak with someone from accounting about payment processing. We've had some irregularities in our receivables from Morrison Tech, and I'm trying to trace the source. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was investigating irregularities, just not the kind she thought. "Let me call up to accounting," Jessica said, reaching for her phone. While she made the call, I studied the company directory displayed on a digital screen near the elevators. Richard Harrison, VP Strategic Development, Floor 3. Sarah Williams, Project Manager, Floor 2. Interesting. The VP and a project manager working closely together across different floors. Very closely, based on the evidence I'd gathered. "Mr. Peterson from accounting can see you for a few minutes," Jessica said, hanging up the phone. "3rd floor, suite 312. I thanked her and headed for the elevators, making mental notes about the building's security systems. Badge access for employees, but visitors were given temporary key cards. Standard corporate setup, but with some interesting vulnerabilities I filed away for later use. The 3rd floor was executive territory. Thick carpets, real wood paneling, and offices with actual doors instead of cubicles. Suite 312 housed a nervous-looking man in his 50s who introduced himself as Tom Peterson. "You mentioned irregularities in vendor payments?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit across from his desk. "Yes, we've been seeing some unusual patterns in payments from Morrison Tech. Charges that don't match our standard corporate rates, some categorized under training and development that don't correspond to services we provided." Tom frowned and pulled up his computer. "What's your company name?" Riverside Resort and Conference Center, I said smoothly. We've been seeing personal rate charges being processed through your corporate accounts. His frown deepened as he typed. That would be highly irregular. All our corporate bookings go through me personally. That's what we thought. The charges are coming through under a Richard Harrison authorization, but they're being processed at personal rates instead of your corporate discount rates. Tom's fingers flew over his keyboard. Richard Harrison, VP Strategic Development. He does have authority for training and team building expenses, but... He paused, staring at his screen. This is odd. What kind of odd? Well, I'm seeing several charges to your resort over the past 6 months, all authorized by Mr. Harrison and categorized as team-building exercises. But they're not showing up in my corporate booking records. So someone's been booking personal stays and having the company pay for them? It looks that way. Tom's expression had shifted from nervous to concerned. This is exactly the kind of thing our compliance department needs to know about. I leaned forward slightly. What's your normal procedure for investigating something like this? We'd need to pull all the related transactions, cross-reference them with actual business activities, and determine if there's been any misuse of company funds. He looked up from his computer. This could be serious. Embezzlement, serious. I figured as much. We've got documentation on our end showing the personal nature of these bookings. Room service charges for champagne and luxury meals, spa services, things that wouldn't be part of a normal corporate training event. Tom was already reaching for his phone. I need to contact our compliance officer immediately. Can you provide us with copies of your records? Absolutely. I can email everything over this afternoon. I stood up and handed him a business card I'd printed that morning with a fake name and a Google Voice number. We appreciate Morrison Tech's cooperation in clearing this up. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Mr. He glanced at the card. Mr. Davis. This is exactly the kind of fraud we work hard to prevent. I shook his hand and headed back toward the elevators, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction. Tom Peterson seemed like the kind of conscientious accountant who would follow up thoroughly on potential embezzlement. By Monday morning, Richard Harrison was going to have some very uncomfortable questions to answer. The elevator stopped on the second floor, and I couldn't resist taking a quick look around. The project management department was an open floor plan with cubicles and a few small offices along the windows. I spotted Sarah's desk easily. It was the one covered with stress balls and empty coffee cups, where a blonde woman in a black designer suit was having what looked like a heated phone conversation. No, Richard, you don't understand, she was saying in a loud whisper. He knows. He knows about the resort, about the expenses, about everything. I stepped back behind a pillar where I could listen without being seen. What do you mean, how does he know? He's an IT auditor, Richard. This is what he does for a living. Sarah's voice was rising despite her attempts to whisper. We need to stop this before it gets out of hand. There was a pause while she listened to whatever Richard Harrison was saying on the other end. No, I can't just move out. He's got documentation, financial records. If I run, it's going to look even worse. Another pause. What do you mean, buy him off? With what money? You're the one with the corporate expense account. I smiled and quietly headed back to the elevators. Sarah was beginning to understand the scope of her problem, but she hadn't seen anything yet. My phone buzzed as I walked back to my car, a text from an unknown number. This is Tom Peterson from Morrison Tech. I've already spoken with our compliance department. They're very interested in your documentation. Can you send those records as soon as possible? I typed back, sending them over within the hour. Happy to help. By the time I got home, Sarah's car was already in the driveway. I found her sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and papers scattered everywhere. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. We need to talk, she said. Sure. What's on your mind, roommate? David, please. This has gone far enough. What do you want? Money. I can get you money. Where exactly would you get money, Sarah? Your project manager salary? Or are you planning to embezzle more from your company? She flinched like I'd slapped her. It's not embezzlement. Richard has discretionary funds for team building and employee development. Team building? I laughed. Is that what you're calling it? Because the accounting department at Morrison Tech has a different name for it. They call it fraud. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the call they're going to get Monday morning from their compliance department. I'm talking about the investigation they're going to launch into Richard Harrison's expense account. I'm talking about the federal charges you're both going to face when they discover the pattern of misuse. Sarah stared at me in horror. You didn't. I did. Turns out your company takes embezzlement very seriously. Who knew? She buried her face in her hands. David, you don't understand. This will destroy everything. My career, Richard's career, his marriage. Should have thought of that before you decided to treat company funds like your personal shopping account. What do you want? The question came out muffled through her hands. Please, just tell me what you want to make this stop. I looked at her sitting there in her $1,500 suit, surrounded by the debris of her crumbling lies, and felt something cold and satisfied settle in my chest. I want you to be exactly what you said you wanted to be, I said quietly. A roommate who pays bills. Nothing more, nothing less. And the investigation? That's between you and the federal government now. I'm just a concerned citizen who noticed some irregularities. Sarah looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, undiluted fear mixed with something that might have been respect. I don't know who you are anymore, she whispered. I'm the roommate who pays bills, I replied. The question is, who are you? She didn't have an answer for that, but she was about to find out. The weekend passed in tense silence. Sarah spent most of it locked in her bedroom, alternating between frantic phone calls and what sounded like crying. I spent it researching federal sentencing guidelines for embezzlement and enjoying the best coffee I'd had in months. Monday morning brought the storm I'd been expecting. I was in my home office working on a legitimate audit for a healthcare company when I heard Sarah's phone ring at 7:30 a.m. Her voice carried through the thin walls, rising from confused to panicked to desperate in the span of about 3 minutes. What do you mean? Suspended pending investigation, she was saying. Richard, what investigation? There was a long pause. Then, how is this possible? Who would have reported? Oh God, David was right. Another pause, longer this time. No, I can't come to your office. They've suspended both of us, remember? We're not supposed to have any contact during the investigation. I heard her pacing in her bedroom, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a metronome counting down to disaster. What do you mean it gets worse? How could it possibly get worse? The clicking stopped abruptly. Federal agents, Richard, are you telling me the FBI is involved in this? I smiled and took another sip of coffee. Tom Peterson had been even more thorough than I'd hoped. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from her bedroom dressed in jeans and a sweater, the first time I'd seen her in casual clothes on a weekday in over a year. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. David, she said, standing in the doorway of my office. We need to talk. I'm working. Can it wait? No, it can't wait. Please. I saved my work and turned around in my chair. Sarah looked like she'd aged 5 years over the weekend. What's on your mind? Morrison Tech has suspended me pending a federal investigation into misuse of company funds. That's unfortunate. David, please. I know you're angry, but this is going to destroy my life, my career, my reputation, everything. Should have thought of that before you started stealing from your employer. It wasn't stealing. The words came out sharper than she intended. Richard has discretionary authority for employee development and team building. What we did was unconventional, but it wasn't illegal. I laughed. Sarah, do you hear yourself? You've been using company money to fund your affair with your married boss. You've been staying at luxury resorts, buying expensive gifts, living a lifestyle you couldn't afford on your salary. That's embezzlement, plain and simple. The FBI doesn't get involved in simple embezzlement cases. They do when it crosses state lines. They do when it involves corporate fraud. They do when the amounts are large enough to constitute felony theft. I leaned forward in my chair. How much money are we talking about, Sarah? 10,000? 20? More? She didn't answer, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. More than 20,000, I said. Wow, that's serious federal time you're looking at. David, please, you have to help me fix this. I don't have to do anything. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. Sarah sank into the chair across from my desk, her composure finally cracking completely. What if I end the lease? What if I move out? Would that help? Help with what? With making this stop. With making you stop. I studied her face, seeing desperation and something else, a calculating look that suggested she still didn't understand the scope of her problem. Sarah, you seem to think I'm orchestrating this investigation. I'm not. I simply provided information to the appropriate authorities about potential financial irregularities. What happens next is entirely up to the federal government. But you could call them off. You could tell them it was a mistake, that you were wrong about the evidence. Except I wasn't wrong. And even if I wanted to, which I don't, it's too late. The FBI doesn't drop investigations because someone changes their mind. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there was something different in her expression, a hardness I'd never seen before. You want me to beg, don't you? You want me to grovel and apologize and promise to be the perfect girlfriend again. I want you to be what you said you wanted to be, a roommate who pays bills. And if I refuse, if I move out and find somewhere else to live, then you move out and find somewhere else to live, but it won't change the federal investigation. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You know what? Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not going down alone. If the FBI wants to investigate embezzlement, maybe they should look into how my ex-boyfriend obtained confidential financial information about my employer. Maybe they should investigate whether you hacked into company systems to gather evidence. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Go ahead. Tell them exactly how I gathered my evidence. Tell them about the passive network monitoring on my own home Wi-Fi. Tell them about the shared credit card statements I had every legal right to access. Tell them about the public records and corporate filings I researched. Please, by all means, explain to federal agents how I used completely legal methods to uncover your completely illegal embezzlement scheme. The hardness in her expression wavered slightly. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? You want to bet your freedom on that? Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out of my office. I heard her bedroom door slam, followed by the sound of drawers being pulled out and luggage being dragged from the closet. An hour later, she was loading suitcases into her car. I watched from the kitchen window as she made trip after trip, her movements sharp and angry. When she was finished, she came back inside one last time. I'm staying at my sister's until I can find a permanent place, she announced. Okay. Don't forget you're still on the lease until the end of the month. Rent's due regardless of whether you're actually living here. You'll get your money. I'm sure I will. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. David? Yeah? I really did love you, you know, once upon a time. I know. That's what makes this so satisfying. She flinched like I'd hit her, then walked out and closed the door behind her. I watched from the window as she sat in her car for several minutes before finally driving away. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Mr. Davis, this is Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We received your documentation from Morrison Tech's compliance department. We'd like to schedule an interview to discuss your findings. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I saved the number and typed back, available anytime this week. Happy to assist with your investigation. The apartment felt different now, bigger somehow, like someone had removed a piece of furniture that had been taking up too much space. I walked through the rooms, noting all the things Sarah had left behind, the expensive coffee maker she couldn't afford to replace, half the furniture we'd bought together, the framed photos of us that she'd apparently decided weren't worth keeping. I gathered up the photos and dropped them in the trash, then made myself a fresh cup of coffee using the good beans I'd been hoarding on my side of the refrigerator. My phone rang. Mike from the gym. Hey man, how's the roommate situation? Roommate moved out today, I said. I think I'm going to enjoy living alone for a while. Good for you. Want to celebrate? There's a new sports bar downtown that's supposed to have great wings. Actually, yeah, that sounds perfect. As I got ready to leave, I found myself humming for the first time in months. Sarah had wanted to treat me like a roommate who pays bills. Instead, she'd discovered what it felt like to have a roommate who was very, very good at his job. And I was just getting started. 3 weeks later, I was having the best month of my adult life. The apartment was mine again, my bank account was healthier than it had been in years, and I'd started dating a marketing executive named Jennifer, who paid for her own dinners and never once mentioned team-building exercises. The federal investigation was proceeding exactly as I'd hoped. Agent Chen had been thorough, professional, and very appreciative of my documentation. Apparently, the Morrison Tech case was part of a larger investigation into corporate fraud, and Sarah and Richard Harrison had provided exactly the kind of evidence they needed to establish patterns of embezzlement. I was reviewing the final details of my healthcare audit when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Sarah standing on my doorstep, looking like she hadn't slept in days. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. What do you want, Sarah? I need to talk to you, please, David. 5 minutes. She looked terrible, hollow-eyed, thin, wearing clothes that looked like she'd been sleeping in them. The designer suits and perfect makeup were gone, replaced by the kind of desperate exhaustion that comes from watching your entire life collapse in slow motion. Talk, I said, not moving from the doorway. The FBI is recommending federal charges. Felony embezzlement, conspiracy, wire fraud. My lawyer says I'm looking at 5 to 7 years in prison. That's unfortunate. Richard's already agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's giving them everything: names, dates, amounts, other people who might have been involved in similar schemes. Smart of him. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. He's throwing me under the bus, David. He's claiming I seduced him into the embezzlement scheme, that I manipulated him into authorizing the expenses. He's painting me as the mastermind. Are you? Of course not. It was his idea. He had the authority, the access to company funds. I just went along with it. I studied her face, seeing the truth underneath the desperation. Sarah had never been a mastermind of anything. She was a follower, someone who attached herself to people with power and rode their coattails as far as they would take her. The problem was that when the coattails got caught in a federal investigation, everyone fell together. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to call Agent Chen. Tell her you made a mistake, that you misunderstood the financial records. Tell her there's no evidence of embezzlement. Except there is evidence, mountains of it. And it's not just my evidence anymore. The FBI has conducted their own investigation. They've found other instances of fraud, other victims, other schemes. Your case is just the tip of the iceberg. Sarah's face went white. Other instances? Apparently, Richard Harrison has been running various embezzlement schemes for years. You were just his most recent partner. The FBI has identified at least 3 other employees who participated in similar arrangements over the past 5 years. Oh, God. She leaned against the doorframe, her legs suddenly unsteady. I didn't know. I swear, David, I didn't know about the others. It doesn't matter what you knew. What matters is what you did. Please. The word came out as barely a whisper. I'm begging you. Help me fix this. I looked at her standing there in my doorway. The woman who had reduced 5 years of my life to a subscription service, who had stolen from her employer to fund an affair with her married boss, who had tried to threaten me when her scheme started unraveling. No, I said simply. David, please, I'll do anything. I'll pay you back every penny I cost you over the years. I'll sign a confession admitting I used you. I'll make a public apology. Anything. You still don't get it, do you? I stepped closer to her, close enough that she had to look up to meet my eyes. This isn't about money. This isn't about apologies. This is about consequences. What consequences? For what? For treating people like they're disposable. For thinking you could use me as a personal ATM for 5 years and then discard me like a broken appliance. For believing you were smarter than everyone else and that rules didn't apply to you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I never meant for it to go this far. You never meant to get caught. There's a difference. So that's it? You're just going to let them destroy my life? I'm not letting them do anything. You destroyed your own life. I just documented the process. She stared at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. I don't know who you are anymore. I'm exactly who I always was. You just never bothered to pay attention. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing makeup across her cheek. When this is over, when I get out of prison, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. What kind of person am I, Sarah? The kind who destroys someone's life over a breakup. The kind who uses federal law enforcement as a weapon for personal revenge. I smiled, feeling that familiar cold satisfaction settle in my chest. You're right. I am that kind of person. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She didn't have an answer for that. She turned and walked back to her car, not the luxury sedan she'd been driving before, but an old Honda that probably belonged to her sister. I watched her drive away, knowing it would be the last time I'd see her as a free woman. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Dinner tonight? I found a new place with amazing pasta. I typed back, absolutely. My treat. You don't have to pay for everything, you know. I'm perfectly capable of buying my own dinner. I laughed out loud, standing there in my doorway. I know. That's why I want to. 2 days later, the local news ran a story about the Morrison Tech embezzlement case. Federal agents had arrested 4 people, including a company VP and several project managers, in what they were calling one of the largest corporate fraud schemes in the state's history. The estimated total of embezzled funds was over $200,000. Sarah's mugshot was prominently featured in the coverage. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had made a series of catastrophically bad decisions and was finally facing the consequences. I turned off the television and poured myself a glass of wine, the good wine, the kind I'd been saving for a special occasion. Then I raised the glass in a toast to my empty apartment. To practical arrangements, I said aloud, and to roommates who pay their own bills. The wine was excellent, almost as excellent as the justice. 3 months later, Sarah Williams was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to Morrison Tech Solutions. Richard Harrison received 6 years after the judge determined he had been the ringleader of the embezzlement scheme. I never saw either of them again. But sometimes, when I'm having coffee in my perfectly organized kitchen, or enjoying dinner with Jennifer at a restaurant where we split the bill exactly down the middle, I think about Sarah's note. I don't see you as a boyfriend anymore, just a roommate who pays bills. She was right about one thing. I was very good at paying bills. I was also very good at making sure other people paid theirs.